Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I really want to thank and shout out to Allison, Sheila, Rachel, Arthur, Michael, Jackie, and everyone who changed plans today to make this service happen. And please bear with my slightly modified voice as I speak to you from home. This past Thursday was National Coming Out Day, a day to celebrate LGBTQIA plus persons, to honor their stories, to inspire people to come out about who they are and who they love. Celebrating October 11th on my feed on Facebook is usually a day of celebration amongst friends and family. It feels like a reunion of pride. But yet, if we only just see the glitter and the glamour of the celebration of Coming Out Day, or of Pride, we can sometimes miss the larger meaning of the day. We might be distracted and pleased into thinking how much of an accepting society we live in now, or how safe our country is for LGBTQIA plus people. If we look a little deeper and understand why Coming Out Day was founded, and why sharing stories of queer and trans, non-binary, gay, lesbian, bisexual, aromantic, and many other people is so very important, we can see the truth of America and empower ourselves to share our own truths. In 1988, activists Jean O'Leary and Robert Eichberg marked the first anniversary of the 1987 National March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights in the early era of the AIDS epidemic. So a year later, Coming Out Day was established as a remembrance of the National March on Washington, but also to honor and celebrate LGBTQ stories. Robert and Jean wanted to be proactive instead of reactive. They knew there was anti-LGBTQIA propaganda out there, and they wanted not to be defensive against the propaganda, but to share their own truths. Robert Eichberg said in 1993, quote, "Most people think they don't know anyone who's gay or lesbian, and in fact, everybody does. It is imperative that we come out and let people know who we are and disabuse them of their fears and stereotypes." In some ways, I believe we've witnessed Robert and Jean's theories work over the last 30 years, where more and more people have come out, where more and more people have shared their stories, and it's made more and more people feel seen. And so we've seen queer, trans, LGBTQIA plus people mainstream on our TV cable networks, on our media shows. And yet there is something that I am deeply struggling with in 2024 when it comes to Coming Out Day. I feel like I'm in this weird dichotomy because here we are 36 years later, after the AIDS epidemic, after marriage equality, and our literal queer stories are being banned from bookshelves in schools and libraries across the country. We live in a strange time where queer people are both featured in the news, talked about in mainstream media, treated as if everyone's good and okay and love is love. We have large corporations selling rainbows in their stores as if it's all good. We're done. And yet, at the same time, we have the rise of hate-mongering laws banning our free speech and ways of living out our lives. And some might say this divide is specifically along the red and blue line of partisanship in our country, but I've seen it play out across different political identities and lines, almost like a divided sense of self when it comes to America's stance on LGBTQIA people. I've seen very loud and proud Republican gay men fight against Drag Story Hour or claim that certain books should be banned. I've also seen loud and proud Democratic lesbians proclaim anti-trans narratives. I've seen cities that honor the history of LGBTQIA+ rights, like Los Angeles and New York City, still struggle to have queer housing laws or healthcare bills in their city ordinances. And I've seen companies so swiftly wanting to sell you their rainbow merchandise during Pride Month prevent their own employees having access to healthcare or civil rights protections. Do you see my confusion here? It feels now in 2024 there's both this proclamation that the United States is such an accepting and loving country, and in reality, our laws are getting even more controlling. And there's more efforts to control our bodies, our livelihoods, our expressions of self, and quite literally, our books or stories. In some ways, the misinformation around trans, non-binary, and queer folks is nothing new. This is exactly what the founders of National Coming Out Day were trying to fight against by founding the holiday. They knew they were trying to create a more positive story of LGBTQ people, instead of reacting to the fears of negative ones. And here we are, 36 years later, still saying the same thing. Seeing fears about what's going to happen in the bathroom if we allow people to go use the restroom they feel most aligns with their gender identity. Or we hear the fear in the ways, oh no, our kids can't have access to those books, it's too adult for them, even when they're put in adult sections of libraries. We hear the fear when it comes to you can't treat your kids and give them access to trans healthcare. It's too soon, or too early, or too irreversible, instead of actually understanding what trans healthcare is for people who are of the ages 8 to 11, or 11 to 14, or 14 to 16, or 16 or 18. There's so many narratives of misinformation. And at the same time, this almost gloss of like, oh, but we love everyone. Almost like, you don't need civil rights. We put a rainbow flag up, we're good. And it's this kind of confusing place that leaves us in a space without our own stories. It's why telling our truths, including on Coming Out Day, is still so important and leads to the empowerment we need to advocate both for queer, gay, trans people, but also just for everyone living as they are. I want to take Mia Kobe's Genderqueer book as an example. This is one of the most infamous books on the banned book list for several different states across our country. It is often referenced in conservative talking points for its graphic depiction of sex, menstrual cycles, and gender identity, and it's claimed to say that it's not safe for kids to have access to. First and foremost, this is a young adult graphic novel. It is not meant to be shelved with children's books and usually is not. Secondly, this is a memoir, a personal story of Maya discovering her gender identity and being genderqueer and non-binary. The depictions in the book, for those who have read it, are simply descriptions of her own body, navigating things like dating or not dating, figuring out what consent is in sex, and going to gynecological appointments. These images are often like ones you might find in a sex ed class. So it makes me question, what is more disturbing for children in the eyes of these talking heads? The depiction of bodies that they may find in the images, or the story of a child at puberty questioning their gender and doing things opposite of the way that society tells them to? Much like the laws that are trying to ban kids from playing on sports teams of their understood gender, or bans against healthcare, or outrageous claims about Drag Story Hour, we see the fear-mongering that is left to us when certain people are able to control the narrative, are able to say the stories. If we ban stories like those of genderqueer, ones that actually give us the perspective of children who are questioning or wondering around their gender, of people whose perspectives are different than ours, all we have access to are the fearful tales and stereotypes of people who are afraid of letting go of their power, of the stories that are meant to keep us in the closet. Living in the United States, where there are states where you can't even literally say the word gay, the ownership of which stories are allowed to be shared and which stories remain hidden is quite obvious. Coming out day and coming out today in 2024 is differently risky now than it was in 1998. They were both risky. Trust me. I know that coming out in the middle of the AIDS epidemic is very, very different than coming out now. And yet for some, while it may be so easy or even mainstream to have all the support and love of neighbor and friends, this is not guaranteed in states where you literally can't say the word gay, in places where you still may lose your jobs, in places where people are bullied or prevented access from the healthcare they need. And even more recently and more scarily, it's really scary when some parents may lose access to their own children by listening to their children and giving them the healthcare they wish for. When we have a vice president who says, quote, "We have children failing to learn math, but who know 87 different types of pronouns," end quote, do you wonder why it's harder for people to come out now? It is. And it is precisely why it's so important for those who can bear the risk to come out and share their stories, including allies or people who know and who love those who are on the LGBTQIA spectrum. As has always been the truth, people will try to bury our truth. They will try to say we don't exist, or we're not really real, or that's abnormal, or that's not right. We know the fears and we know the lies. But as we studied in our story today, the truth lives on, no matter how much people crush it. We have always existed throughout time, and we will always exist into the future. People will try to tell our stories for us, but there will always be the truth and the stories we share ourselves. For all of us who are Unitarian Universalists, we have values and principles that affirm the inherent worth and dignity of each and every person, and as well, the search for truth and meaning. This is why we teach OWL and sexual education courses, to provide our teens and young adults with the truth and knowledge they may need to be fully formed, consenting, and loving adults. This is why we have services and sermons like today, because we believe that sharing more truths, sharing more stories makes all of our lives richer. In providing spaces to empower each other to be honest about the truths of our lives, we create a more compassionate, empathetic, and loving community. When we take seriously our commitment to put love at the center of our faith and our work in our world, then we continue to advocate and empower for each other to share the truth of our stories. It is in that ethos that I share, without completely spoiling it, the end of the book Genderqueer. For as much as the book Genderqueer has been banned, its notoriety has actually helped several more people to read it, granting access to this resource for young adults wondering if they're alone in their gender confusion. At the end of the book, Eric gives us a glance at our struggle to come out, and also it's important. Maya reflects on her time teaching a class of 11 to 14-year-olds about the art of comics and comic drawing. He says, quote, "Those were my first big years of gender confusion, but I doubt anyone would have guessed it by looking at me. I wonder if any of these kids are trans and non-binary, but don't have the words for it yet. How many of them have ever seen a non-binary adult? Is my silence actually a disservice to all of them? Question mark. After admitting how scary it could be to come out as non-binary in front of kids, how E might lose their job, or a parent complain, Maya says, quote, next time I will come out. That is where E leaves the book. Next time, I hope all of us continue to empower ourselves and each other to share the truth of our stories, because we are waiting for a world so centered on love that everyone is free to own their stories and share the truth. May it be so, and amen.